What wedding moment made you think they are not going to last long? As a wedding photographer, I have been to more than my share of weddings. It was a real shotgun wedding. Dad didn't realize it would not stand up in court. Only time the groom was more excited to have photos than the bride. She wanted a limo. He thought a hearse would be better and kept doing lurch impressions. From the Addams family, her friends took turns motorboating her, females, and he said, "Get it out of your system, as after tonight you never get to do that again." Was a good sign also when she dove into the pool with her bridesmaids at the reception in her wedding dress. Don't know what happened. Sat down with bride and groom, filling out the contract. Got the deposit. He stood up, said forget it, and walked out. 2 months later I get told the wedding is off. 3 months later she calls to rebook. Different groom. Day of the wedding I'm at the church. Got the final payment the week before. No one shows. No one, just me and the DJ. Source, my wedding. We'll start 3 days before. The wedding was a Ren Fair style wedding outside at a large gazebo, and the maid of honor had promised to purchase a stylized dress for my bride that they had agreed on. 3 days before the wedding she calls to tell us she had no money and was embarrassed to admit it, so we literally hand sewed on together in 24 hours. It turned out pretty nice for what we had. Bride's mother was supposed to pick up the cake in ATX and drive an hour south for the wedding. She left her house 30 minutes before the wedding to pick it up. When she finally showed up, hour late, the cake was destroyed. She put it in the back seat and drove like hell all the way down, just slamming it against box with every turn. During the 1 hour delay, there was almost a fist fight between two groomsmen because, well, the MOH showed up in the dress that she was unable to afford. Obvious attempt to upstage the bride. The same MOH during her speech after the ceremony started it off by saying, "When we all met, I did not like Draca M411 at all. However, I found that he grows on you like a fungus." Needless to say, my entire side of the family was super cold to all of this. Since all of these issues were on her side of friendships or families, I was told to suck it up and we'll discuss later. I sort of assumed that a lot of these friends had just shown themselves the door. Quite the opposite. In fact, 2 years later, when I accepted my first well-paying job out of college, it became an issue that it was an hour and a half out of Austin, so she decided to just stay in ATX to be with her friends. I mailed her the divorce papers, and since she couldn't be bothered to even show up to the hearing, I've never seen her again. She told me 2 days before that she found her fiancé annoying, and that she didn't like him, and that he was awful in bed. She was visibly, endlessly uncomfortable at the rehearsal wedding/dinner combo. Then she sobbed the entire morning. Dave. She ended up not getting any makeup done, cause she wouldn't stop sobbing, and refused to get dressed, stalling the wedding 35 minutes. She then said 45 minutes of vows that she had prepared, 9 pages of things like inappropriate vows to friends and family, his parents and sisters, none of them her husband, and then almost didn't say I do. Managed to get a, "Oh, yeah, okay, yeah I do" out of her almost a full 60 seconds after she was supposed to say anything. I could go on for hours, but it was the most painful and awkward wedding I've ever been to. I've got my money on 10 months. We are 1 month in. Edit. 2.5 month update. I've distanced myself from them completely. She is really clingy and likes to gossip about how awful her husband is, and I really don't have the time. She's also told me they are in couples therapy after I expressed negativity towards some extremely concerning things she said regarding their relationship plus lack of communication. But I'm still betting on 10 months because she believes it's all his fault and truly believes his parents and sisters are exactly the same. Newsflash, they're all lovely people. Edit #2. 5-month update. I no longer associate with them, so I'm out of the loop regarding juicy details. Last I heard they keep moving all over the country and fight non-stop. No more Love Adove images on social media. Seems to be right on track for a 10-month breakup. I've got two. One of my good friends got married, and I'd never met her before the wedding, because she's just shy. On the wedding day, she was belligerently drunk before the ceremony even started, and couldn't even get through the lines she was supposed to repeat. That is, "I promise to love you." She ended up slapping the groom, spilling champagne on her dress, and then crying under a table while he tried to comfort her. They lasted about 4 months. Another one was my wife's friend. She's a very conservative religious white girl who married a black man. Most of her racist family didn't approve of the marriage and didn't show up, but she planned the whole marriage around race. Like a vanilla cake for her and a chocolate cake for him. The wedding colors were black and white, and even the meals were white meat for her side and dark meat for his. It was extremely uncomfortable as a guest. They lasted 2 years, but broke up because he was abusive and almost killed her, rather than the weird racial tension. Not at the wedding itself, but I used to work at a David's bridal. Bride came in with tons of friends. We did the say yes to the dress thing, and an hour later she'd standing there in $3,000 worth of stuff and doesn't have any money with her or in her account. She decides she wants to apply for the store credit card. I run it through the system and she gets denied. She then calls the groom for his info, which, to be fair, people did all the time, and he tells her no. She threw a huge fit on the phone with him, standing on the bridal stage, literally demanding why not, why, like an actual child over and over again. I've never seen a 30-year-old age backwards so quickly. She was just a brat, literally stomping her feet in front of me, all her friends, and the other bride in the store. I was embarrassed. At the end of all of that, she hangs up on him, and her friend is like, "I'm so sorry you can't get your dress," and the bride stops crying instantly and just goes, "Oh, I'll get the dress. I just have to do this at home, and when he gets mad enough he'll come get it for me, so I'll stop." Speechless. Sure enough, girl came back 2 days later with her man and he applied for the credit card and bought the dress. He was livid and silent, and she was smug as hell. Can't imagine they're having a happy marriage if they are still together. I'm witnessing one from the sidelines now. My wife's brother just got married this past May. Bride's mother is a big DIY person and went a little nuts with extra flowers, table pieces, decorations, etc. Note I said extra. It was already decorated by the venue. She just took it upon herself to buy and add way more stuff. Anyway, a few weeks ago she sends my groom's mom, and email with receipts of all the extra stuff she bought, $7,000 worth, and asked that she pay half, since it was technically set up in time for the rehearsal dinner for guests to enjoy. It's causing a huge rift between the new newlyweds, since the bride is taking her mom's side. My wife got invited to a client's daughter's wedding. The couple were both drama students. Many of the bridal party were drama students. The maid of honor's toast consisted of tearful declarations of unrequited love to the groom, along the lines of, "If it couldn't be me, I'm glad it's my best friend that's marrying you." The best man's speech was a lusty declaration of, "If it doesn't work out, call me, babe, like the previous time you called me." Other toasts were similarly weird. A guy at the table I was seated at was a friend of the bride and said to me that he was this close to standing up during the "speak now or forever hold your peace" thing. I'm still not sure if the whole thing was a bunch of emotionally fucked up 20-year-olds or one big piece of performance art. I did my undergraduate degree in literature and there was a lot of overlap with the drama students. None of this surprises me in the least. They were always bragging about how incestuous ** they were. *by which they meant they all slept with each other. I was maid of honor. Me, best man in the couple went into a separate little room to do the signing stuff. Bride excused herself to go to the bathroom and the groom started making pretty mean remarks about her cooking, she's passionate about, to the officiary. She came back, heard they were talking about cooking family meals together, and gave him the warmest smile, thinking he had praised her. He scoffed awkwardly and changed the topic. That always stuck with me. He wasn't laughing with her but at her, behind her back. They lasted 7 months. This one is so heartbreaking. Hope your friend is doing better now. It genuinely made me tear up. I pictured a loving, happy wife returning to hear her new husband talking about what she's passionate about. Then he laughs at her. That makes me sick, poor thing. What an absolute asshole of a husband. I've been with my wife for 10 years, and, though we have our arguments, I could never gossip or shit talk about her behind her back. That's not why I wanted her in my life. He ended up at the emergency room between the ceremony and the reception. He went out the night before with his sister and friends and got plastered. They had to hold a cold pack to the back of his neck to keep him vertical during the wedding photos. Marriage lasted 30 days until they had a fight. She left the house and he filled the U-Haul truck with everything but her clothes. Well, here it goes. My cousin got married probably a decade ago, and during the wedding it came out that groom was not the best to my cousin while dating. The bride's brother did not take this well, and during the after party a shouting match became a brawl between the two families. Next thing you know, the police show up and literally pepper spray everyone, including my grandma, kids and anyone near the area. I don't remember if anyone got arrested, but the story got on CBS, the early show for the international news. Lol, they did not last long to say the least. The morning after the wedding at campfire coffee, the new bride turned to the groom, asked, "Are you going to wear your ring every day? Because it kinda makes you look like a ref***OT. Those of us there side glanced and took deep sips of coffee. I think it lasted 4 to 6 months. When the bride tried to playfully feed the groom some cake, pulling it back once it got close to his mouth. The third time she did this, he slapped it out of her hand and stormed off. In the ensuing awkward silence and wide-eyed staring, we all knew it wouldn't last. Surprisingly, they were together for nearly 2 years before the bride eloped away with her stepbrother. No one saw that coming. Prior to my wedding, I'd asked my husband to practice dancing with me because I'm uncoordinated due to a disability. He blew me off and said we'd be fine. As we were dancing, he spoke in my ear, not even quietly. "What are you doing? What's wrong with you? You're embarrassing me." We lasted 2 years. Leaving was the best decision I ever made. Wow. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Happy to hear you're doing better without that piece of shit now. My uncle, when he broke his neck trying to breakdance on his stag do, he went down the aisle in a wheelchair. She divorced shortly after. He can walk again now, but because of his surgery he cannot turn his neck. One of my go-to stories, because it's fucking insane. I was invited to a high school friend's wedding. The night before the wedding she asked me to join her future husband's bachelor party. He had no friends, and it was only he, his brother, his father, and I. They were not thrilled with my presence. They wanted to go to a strip club, but thought I would rat them out. We to a bar, but I could tell I was the turd in the punch bowl, so I went back to the hotel and they went to a strip club. My friend called me after I got back to the hotel. She asked me why I didn't go to the strip club, and I told her that it wasn't my thing. She asked if we could hang out and catch up. I said sure, and she came to my room only wearing a robe. It was obvious there was nothing on under it. We watched a movie and she fell asleep. At some point in the night she left. The next morning at the wedding I was sitting next to a mutual friend. This friend was encouraging me to object and looked disappointed when I didn't do it. They lasted 5 years, but lived together less than 2. Wedding videographer here. I think my favorite moment was when I was sitting at the miscellaneous table with all the randoms and the girl next to me, the groom's ex, drunkenly admitted to sleeping with the groom a few months prior. I was at a wedding. I was a +1 for my date. The bride sat down drunk at our table and started talking to us. She then told me that she slept with her ex right before walking down the aisle. She fucked her ex in her wedding dress in the bridal suite. She then downed at the last of my drink and went off to the dance floor. I was left speechless. I didn't know anyone but my date. Less than a year later the bride and groom were divorced. I was at a wedding when a phone went off during the ceremony. In the middle of exchanging vows. It was the groom's. He took the call. They are divorced now. Edit to at, I believe it was a cousin calling to ask if they were late for the wedding. I worked at a museum that also doubled as a wedding venue in the summers. As part of the wedding package, the museum would stay open after hours for the guests, only so I'd just sit there and greet people basically. One wedding got particularly rowdy. Almost everyone was drunk. People were jumping into the fountain. Someone vomited in said fountain. At one point, the bride is crying. Turns out the groom and one of his groomsmen were screwing upstairs in one of the bathrooms. A fight ensued between the groom and the father of the bride and cops were called because it really got ugly. Entertaining for me, but I felt so bad for the bride. One of my friends got married. Afterwards she looked at me, crying, and said, "What did I do?" They were separated by the time the plane landed from their honeymoon. He was a good guy, she was a mess. The betta fish and the flower centerpieces lasted longer than the marriage. Where to start? The best man was the groom's coke dealer who dressed in a tux, the only one in a tux. The groom was high on coke and giggled throughout the whole ceremony. The host of the party alternated between arguing with his wife in Russian and running up to us every time he saw us, the bride's friends, the only people that showed up from her side for the wedding, whenever he saw us in groups of 2 or more, and tell us don't smoke weed. If she, his wife, won't let me smoke weed in the house, then you guys can't. Every time we grouped up. When they got married illegally in high school, 2 16-year-olds from different states who had to lie on their certificate to get approved by the state. It was annulled when the father of the groom found out. I actually know a happy version of this. My HS English teacher's friend and her boyfriend took a bus to the next state over where you could get married at 16, and so they eloped in secret and came out about it after they graduated and have been married for over 40 years and counting. I used to work at a pretty shitty privately owned exotic animal facility. Think like Joe Exotic but less meth. People often booked kids' birthday parties, etc. One time, we hosted a wedding reception. The theme was hot fucking pink, so the clowns we normally hire were better dressed than them. The women looked like she wanted to cry the entire time. Not happy tears LMAO. I felt bad for her. I feel like the groom just wanted to book the cheapest venue with AC, and they happened to like animals. If you like animals, you wouldn't support where I worked. Edited for Typus SMH. My brother's ex-wife. Throughout the exchange of vows, she was looking at everyone but my brother, making sure all eyes were on her. Later, she instructed the photographer, a family friend who was cheap, to mingle and get shots of people being happy. Within 10 minutes, she'd summoned the photographer back shouting, "Whose wedding is this? I meant get shots of people being happy for me." Edit. Thought I'd add, they broke up when she cheated on him. Apparently, that marriage she was desperate for was only good while it brought her attention. The bachelor party and the bachelorette party were in Vegas at the same time, across the hall from each other. The bride and groom got in a huge fight on the last night of the trip, and when I was leaving I said, "I'll see you guys at the wedding," to the groom, and he replied, "I'm not sure there's gonna be one." There was a wedding, but they were divorced within 18 months I believe. One of my friends was the best man at another friend of ours' wedding. His best man speech included this line: "I prepared some lines for tonight, but the groom sniffed them all in the bathroom." 3 months later there was a divorce due to a coke problem. At my boyfriend's sister's wedding the groom got drunk before the vows and smoked weed after the vows, was crossfaded as hell, and made a fool of himself. When we went up to congratulate them after, she refused to be near him or take pictures with him. It was awkward. After the speeches basically everyone left. Family was still around, and they opened gifts. Someone gifted nice champagne and the groom tried to open it and dropped it and it shattered. Bride stormed off screaming. Groom got upset and started cussing out the air. They still went to their honeymoon together in Florida, and she got pregnant almost immediately. Maybe 7 months into her pregnancy she kicked him out because he slept with her roommate. They got divorced when their kid was 6 months old. But it's for the best. The dude is a pose and wasted a lot of their money by being selfish on their day. 2 friends of mine got married, and when they gave their vows, the guy started laughing at the part about being faithful. Oops. I once watched a live stream of the wrong Vegas wedding. The link I was given for a friend's wedding was incorrect, and during the exchange of vows, the groom got to the part about being faithful, and the bride visibly and audibly chuckled. It was hilarious to watch, but I bet they didn't last long. Love that you sat and watched their wedding. A wedding's a wedding. This will do. Wow, you guys looked fantastic at the wedding. These were just bad omens rather than red flags. Someone died at my cousin's wedding reception, had a heart attack while dancing. My uncle gave the old Joe Wold wanted us to go on type announcements. The couple then went on their honeymoon to somewhere in Southeast Asia and the country had a coup, so they had to flee across the border. They lasted about 14 months. The groom and best man had a dancing routine for getting into the church ceremony, and they got nearly halfway through it, and I guess the groom felt they hadn't received much applause and wows from us the attendees, and decided to go back to the entrance and start all over. Sigh. Why is no one having a good time? I specifically requested it. That's pretty cringe-worthy. People don't seem to be enjoying this. I'd better stop and start again from the beginning. The entire bridal party, including parents of the wedded couple, entering into a betting pool of how long the marriage would last at the wedding reception. I like the best man won. Price is Right rules at 14 months. Surely you confide in your friends or even your parents about the whole thing, but who am I to say? They were together since junior high and would break up and reconcile every 3 to 6 months. Everyone was just sick of it. Friends and family, and the marriage, at age 19 in the summer between freshman/sophomore year at college, was obviously an attempt to force the relationship to stick. It did not. But at least no kids were involved. I should say the bride/groom did not participate. Everyone else did. That would have been glorious. Groom got into a fist fight with the father of the bride. Split after 4 months. Context: groom and bride's dad. Actually most people in these families, if I'm honest, have pretty aggressive drinking problems. Father-in-law has always hated him. I wasn't around for what actually set it off, but it ended when the bride got in the middle, got an elbow in the eye and the happy couple left for the night. This was in rural Canada. Not Letterkenny, but basically Letterkenny. I'd say the father-in-law won the fight though. Portuguese wedding. Fist fight broke out at the head table during the reception between two groomsmen. They were arguing about which of them had slept with the bride first. Groom was oblivious. He came home from work early one day 2 years later and caught her in bed with another man. Surprised it took that long. Midnight buffet was amazing though. The groom had a best woman instead of a best man. Nothing wrong with that, but her toast left the whole room in awkward silence because she was clearly in love with him. What did she say? I wish I could remember the specifics, but it was all about how they were always together, all the late nights they spent together, etc. She was so tearful during it too. I'm not making it sound as bad as it was, but I assure you, it was bad. The bride and groom did the first dance, then spent the rest of their reception completely apart from each other, getting shit-faced with their own separate friend groups. The only other dancing all night was the bride dancing with her high school friends, the father-daughter dance and the mother-son dance, during which the groom was crying. The best man's speech didn't mention the bride at all, and basically boiled down to: groom, you're married now, but our bond is older and stronger. All of our hunting and fishing trips together are the best thing in our lives. Can't wait for more. Such a sad, desperate atmosphere. They made it a little over 1 year. I used to be a wedding singer and I played a wedding like that once. We had a hard time figuring out who the groom was because he was never anywhere near the bride. The first dance was delayed because the wedding planner had such a hard time getting the two of them in the same place at the same time. Afterwards they both stayed on opposite ends of the ballroom. In the 6 hours of the reception I don't think they ever spoke to one another. The most beautiful wedding I've been to ended in divorce. Venue was where the groom's father is buried, and he cried as he made his vows to the bride there. Turned out he'd been cheating on her for months and they divorced a while later. Something so repugnant about marrying someone you're cheating on practically over your father's grave. To date it's the only wedding I've been to that ended in divorce. My best friend's wedding is tomorrow, and I told her about how I've heard several wedding photographers/videographers say that shoving cake in the face is almost a for sure factor that they are going to divorce. She told me, oh yeah, I told him not to, but he probably will anyways, so we'll see how this goes. Update: she put the cake in his mouth respectfully, but he booped her nose 2 or 3 times, which wasn't huge, and they just laughed it off. I cried a couple times during this wedding because their love does seem very genuine. So sorry if this wasn't the update you were hoping for, lol, but I'll give a 1-year update. I've heard some version of that cake smashing story so many times I feel like there needs to be a sad about it. Marriages survive affairs more often than they survive an unwanted cake smashing. My wife is an event planner with a particular talent for higher end weddings. I'm talking about $150,000 and up for the reception, venue / catering / decor / music alone. The best I've heard from her is the following. Bride and her mother were discussing terms of the prenuptial agreement on the day of the wedding while doing hair and makeup. Something about a 1-year clause, after which the terms eased and the bride could exit the marriage with a nice payout. So I guess the marriage lasted at least a year. Sounds like the plot to a Vince Vaughn movie. I'm a wedding photographer and I have a few of these. When a very young, not dating long couple say things like the partner is perfect and we never fight. When there's name calling, I particularly cringed at it because we so get each other and are so comfortable that he can call me dumb slut as a nickname. They didn't last the year. One where the wedding was all about the groom promoting his band. He even sang his bride a song that was literally just him showing off his vocal range with some classic piece. She stood up and joined him on stage halfway through, and he looked annoyed that he had to share the limelight. They lasted about 2 years. He was sleeping with the other vocalist in the band. Sang his bride a song. On the happier side, I was at a wedding where this happened in a really touching way. The groom had no vocal range, but sang "I'll Be Your Bridge Over Troubled Waters" to her. The fact that his singing wasn't up to performance level highlighted his sincerity. It was really beautiful. I lost touch with the people I knew them through, so don't know how things worked out long term, though. I went to a wedding held at my town's hunting lodge. Tons of stuffed animals on the walls, and no ack in July. Bride was 7 months pregnant and smoking outside in between the wedding and the after party, and the new husband was totally shit-faced by the second song, which was "Rape Me" by Nirvana as requested by the bride's 16-year-old daughter. The whole thing was one giant trashy shit show, haha. They divorced a year later. This was my sister's best friend, and it was a bachelorette party moment. Bride had been having an affair. Everyone knew it. The groom's friends tried to tell him, but she convinced him they were making it up. I mean, at that point it was just sad. She actually had the balls to force fiancé to apologize to the guy she was sleeping with for the accusations. The night of the bachelorette party she actually took all her bridesmaids back to the other guy's house and spent the night with him. He came to their wedding. It was so awkward. Everyone knew and everyone was talking. The groom was told, but chose to overlook it. After the wedding she insisted the other guy come on vacations with her and her husband and included him in all their social functions. Now, if they're non-monogamous, whatever, go crazy. But her husband was an absolute wreck about it for years and she just kept gaslighting him. No one could convince him to leave her. She told my sister that a fair guy insisted he would never marry her and didn't want kids, so she was using fiancé to get them. They ended up divorcing 2 years later after their second child was born. She immediately moved in with a fair guy and they did end up getting married. Edit. I wanted to add a little more context since this comment blew up a bit. Everyone involved in this story was really young, except a fair guy. He had already been married and divorced and had a few kids of his own by then, but he was still well under 30. The original couple had been together since middle school and all this went down between the ages of 21 to 23. I think the husband was just really naive and invested in the relationship. Small town marry your high school sweetheart and live happily ever after bullshit. A fair guy did not go with them on their honeymoon, but he was included in group vacation plans before and after the wedding. Other people in the friend group did start refusing to go if he was involved. The bride had this really twisted power move that husband was not allowed to disrespect or offend a fair guy. Any jealousy or suspicions were his own insecurities, and anyone who said they were sleeping together just didn't understand platonic friendship. A fair guy was just a good friend, her best friend really, and husband needed to get over it. Bride and a fair guy are still married, and the second child is likely actually his. Groom married a girl they went to high school with and seems content. Showed up to the wedding of a friend of my husband's who I knew casually. When we arrived at the church, the groom was very drunk in the parking lot and getting drunker by the minute. I thought it was kinda nuts, since it was a full Catholic ceremony which involved lots of kneeling and standing. I honestly have no idea how he made it thought that, but he did. At the reception, he proceeded to continue the drinking party while his new wife cried in the washroom. When it was time for the first dance, he kind of stumbled around the dance floor despite a year of dance lessons. When it was time for him to take his new wife's garter off and throw it to the bachelors, he instead did a striptease type dance and got himself down to his underwear in front of many elderly family members. People were shocked and talking, and all in all it was a shit show. I gave this marriage a year or two tops. They, however, are still married 25 plus years later. They got secretly married at the local town hall out of spite to the girl's father, who did not agree with the relationship. This happened right out of high school and they divorced during my sophomore year at college. Spite, the foundation of all great marriages. I married my wife just to spite her. My husband was the best man at a wedding. The bride was a nightmare, not just during the wedding, but in general everyday life. All of the friends hated her, and she had no friends of her own. We knew it was doomed when, during the portraits, the bride was making everyone miserable as can be. The groom said, exact words, "I'll just send her to therapy. And, if that doesn't work, we can just get divorced." Edit, for emphasis. I was kindly included in a last minute +1 to the wedding of a family friend who I'd never met before. At the rehearsal dinner, or the German equivalent, the Polterabend, the guests smashed ceramic and porcelain items on the ground. I was fresh in Germany, so this was all pretty out of context and frightening, but my boyfriend explained that it's a tradition, reminding the couple that life is sometimes difficult and you have to work together to clean it up. The bride kind of half-heartedly motioned to the groom to sweep it up. He did a little bit, then just moved on to talk to his friends, leaving most of the shards strewn around the yard. Additionally, I don't think I saw the couple talk to each other once over the next 3 days of celebrations. It was a gorgeous wedding, and I'm so grateful that I was invited. Really good way to begin living in a new country, but it wasn't surprising to hear that they'd divorced a few years later. The groom took the stupid cake thing to an extreme. The bride had given him his bite and mushed a little on his chin or nose. He then took a piece and mashed it into her face so hard that I was expecting her to end up with a bloody nose. Cake and frosting got up her nose, in her eyes, down the front of her dress, etc. The bride had to go get cleaned up, had her makeup redone, and was ugly crying within an hour of saying, "I do." He didn't give a fuck. Had a buddy, this was almost 30 years ago, BTW, whose girlfriend told him that if he mashed the cake in her face, it was over. She told him at least 10 times in my presence. Day of the wedding, his buddies had gotten to him by making the whip noise and saying he had to show her who wore the pants. She fed him his piece, he mashed her face, she walked out, and had the marriage annulled. I live for these threads. Anyway, I know a photographer who was offered to shoot a wedding on the Gold Coast, Australia. If you're from Australia then you know the Gold Coast, while beautiful, has a lot of Jersey Shore types living there. It's kind of like Miami, but no celebrities and very trashy. My friend is getting shots of everybody getting dressed up at the same time because the groomsman, bride and bridesmaids are all getting ready in the same room. The groom decided to have his bucks party, bachelor, stag do, the night before, so they are all hungover as shit and snorting line after line of coke, something that is making my photographer friend's job hard because she can't get any nice shots of the groom or groomsman without these illicit drugs in view. The energy in the room is getting uncomfortable, so the bride asks if they could take it easy on the coke and get a couple of nice photos. The groom yells, "Shut up, cunt," and keeps snorting. The girl who got my friend the gig said they divorced like 4 months later. Another friend of mine was pressured into marrying his girlfriend of like 8 years because she dropped an ultimatum, "Propose to me within a year or we're done." He does, so they get married, but of every wedding photo she posted on Facebook, neither one of them looked happy. They divorced barely a year into their marriage. When they disappeared for half an hour during the reception, they were both saving themselves for marriage and were desperate to bone down, which is a fine thing to want. But it turns out that was more or less the main reason they got married. They made it almost a year. My high school teacher told me a story of 2 people who waited for marriage too. In Utah, they have a massive porn problem and the husband definitely watched too much. He brought an outfit, a movie, toys, and I swear a whip for their wedding night. The wife burst into tears and locked herself in the bathroom for the entire night. My teacher's lesson was to talk to your partner about everything including sex lol. YTF am I reading this the morning of my wedding? Edit for anyone interested. It went great, other than me losing my ring during pictures. Thank you all for the well wishes, it means a lot to us both. Lots of love for everyone. Wedding photographer here. I can think of a few. Full blown row during dinner. Had another couple fist fight during a first dance. An infamous one for me was leaving a venue late one night, and as I'm walking to the train I can see the bride down an alley, on her knees with the best man. I was the wedding photographer for a reality TV show. End of the night I'm having a few drinks with the film crew and the groom has come up to me and one of the producers and says I think I've made a big mistake. So we are trying to be reassuring and telling him it's natural to second guess such a bit decision, to which he replies no I mean I think him gay. I had them both on Facebook. The drama the next week was mesmerizing to watch unfold. I've got a ton of these stories. Edit, since you asked. Was working with a video guy who had the bride and groom on radio mix. Sat around waiting for the evening action to kick off, and the video dude called me over and said listen to this. Groom was talking to one of the bridesmaids about how they had to end their affair now he's married. Not a how, could you tell they wouldn't last, but shooting in an old church on the hottest day of the year. Watching the groom wait for the bride and he's swaying back and forth. Next thing he's fainted, fallen forward and slammed his mouth into a stone step. Smashed his front teeth out, blood everywhere. Had a bride and groom on a trampoline for photos, groom's heading downward, bride's about to go up. He lands on her dress, just as she goes up, and she pops out the top of the dress, boobs flailing around in the air. Shot a traveler wedding which erupted into a massive brawl. Watched a drunk usher knock over a wedding cake. Weddings are amazing. I've been doing this for about 12 years, and seen some sights, but I still love shooting them even now. I worked at a nice restaurant in Nala. Bride is lovely, she is excited and very receptive to our suggestions on things and their budget. Groom is an insufferable know-it-all. Has bargain hunting. Crab cakes don't cost that much, what if I buy them and you serve them on their big day? I'm holding the door as they walk out the first time as husband and wife. W. We got married, I'm so happy. H. Not really, we got to fill out paperwork and file it with the state. I've seen 3-week-old balloons less deflated than that poor woman. I hope she got out of there. The bride told her bridesmaids that she didn't actually want to get married. Multiple times. No one told the groom until after the divorce. Had a friend who did this. Kept telling me and other friends she wasn't sure she wanted to get married anymore and was having second thoughts. We all told her to call it off, but she went through with it anyway. They split 6 months later. When he raised his eyebrows and gave her a knowing look during the forfeiture or forpora portion of their vows. For context, he was a newly drafted pro athlete and she was a big fan of his signing bonus. When the maid of honor professed her love for my brother during her toast at my brother's wedding, and her husband walked up to the head table, picked her up, and carried her away before she could embarrass him further. They lasted about 3 months after that. My brother and his wife on the other hand are still happily married 20 years later. WTF, everyone knows you're supposed to burst through the church doors unannounced literally seconds before they are pronounced man and wife. Doing it at the reception is just tacky. A month before the wedding, the couple made an appointment with me, the church music director / organist, to plan music for the ceremony. Each made suggestions on music he or she would like. But no matter how many pieces were considered and demonstrated, they couldn't agree on anything and would get into heated arguments over processionals, recessionals, vocal solos, and prelude music, even though they were all good possibilities. The bride and groom simply seemed indifferent to one another's wishes and needs. In the end, based on what I heard each of them most wanting, I offered compromises in an effort to bring about peace, selections which they finally agreed to. They were engaged, but showed no signs of being in love. They were both so drunk they were slurring during the vow exchange. One of the best pieces of advice we got from my wife's parents was to get married early in the day, and I'm so glad we did. Ceremony was at 11:30 am on a Saturday, so we didn't have to worry about anyone in the wedding party showing up drunk. Then everyone still had like 12 solid hours to drink and party at the reception and B&D. I get why people sometimes like getting married later in the evenings, but daytime weddings will always be my favorite. Had an old boss who was divorced. He told me once I should have known it wasn't going to last when the only happy moment I had on my wedding day was when I snuck out to smoke weed with my buddies in the parking lot. Weddings are unduly stressful though. I'd focus more on whether you enjoy spending time with your spouse, just the two of you. Yep. The first thing our marriage counselor said, unprompted, at our first appointment was, "I don't give a shit about your wedding." It was such a relief to hear that, as all of our energy and focus had been going to getting married, and none of it into being married. Edit for clarity, this was premarital counseling, while we were engaged. Not at the wedding itself, but when my spouse and I went to pick up our marriage license, we encountered a young man shouting at his fiancée outside the building, because she had failed to remind him to bring the right IDs. We were like, big yikes. I hope they're doing okay. When my cousin and her husband said I semi-promise in their vows, as in I semi-promise to love and honor, blah, blah, blah. I have no idea WTF it was supposed to mean, but I guess it sounds better than I'll try, but if it's too hard, fuck it, I'm out. Weird twist, they've been married 30 plus years now. Maybe it was an inside joke. Maybe, but this was at a super conservative Southern Baptist, fire, and brimstone church. The kinds that still includes a bay pretty often. I have never met a preacher at one of those places that would be okay with the semi-promise. It confused the hell out of everyone there, and there was a lot of side each "did you hear that too" looks. In good Southern family tradition, no one really addressed it, just gossiped later. The world may never know. I was the maid of honor. They seemed like the perfect couple, together for nearly 10 years, and had this big, expensive, beautiful wedding. Bride would have been happy with a small event, but told me groom had a big family and had insisted. Alarm bells hit when I sat with her parents in the front row and realized the groom to bride ratio was so massively off. The groom had 3 best men, as well as ushers etc. His sister and one best man read something during the ceremony, and then all 3 said long speeches about him at dinner. It was all about him. The photographer was even his friend's mum, so she kept whisking away the boys for these "hilarious lad shoots." The bride was ignored most of the day, and in the evening he got too drunk, spilt a drink over her wedding gown, and danced with his friends. It felt more like a big birthday party than a joint event. I'd never seen that side to him, but I felt so sorry for my friend. It was like she was just there to be a prop to his plans and look good. 3 months after the wedding he began being emotionally abusive. A month after that he admitted he'd been having an affair for years, then left. If I hadn't seen the way he behaved at the wedding, I never would have guessed he had that in him. Edit, as so many people are being kind, I'll update you. My friend hasn't been able to trust or date again yet, and it's been 4 years. However, she has become an amazingly brave woman who's traveled to some amazing places alone and is now retraining to change careers. I think she learned never to be a backseat passenger in a relationship again. Honestly, the way she handled the whole thing with such grace and determination makes me so proud to be her friend. She basically told him when he left that he would never see her or hear from her or about her again. She dropped all friends that had a connection with him after he left and made sure he would always live his life wondering if he made the right decision and what she was up to. I really hope his dying thought is about her, and I know for a fact hers won't be about him. She'll find real love. The ceremony was delayed because the bride and groom were on the phone with the groom's mother, who refused to come to the wedding, trying to be talked into still going through with it. Apparently they had a huge and physical fight the night before. Their roommate at the time didn't come either. He told me what he saw in the house the night before was enough for him to know this wedding was doomed and they should not be dating, let alone getting married. Edit, in an attempt to answer some of these questions. First, this was about 20 years ago, and we are all in our 40s now and have moved on with life since. So, I don't know why the mother wasn't there. I just remember thinking it was weird when I noticed she wasn't, and then later heard they were on the phone with her. The roommate was visibly angry when I went to pick him up for the wedding. Outright refused to come, and I think ended up moving out and basically disappearing after. He was a big dude who worked as a bouncer at clubs, and my impression was he had to go into work mode the night before in his living room and wasn't happy about it. I never heard details and I wouldn't have felt right asking for them. I'm still friends, in the sense that I see them every few years, with both the bride and groom. See my comment below for how they turned out. Happy ending considering. I should also add, the years in which they dated and got married, all of us were very heavy binge drinkers. We were in our 20s and worked service industry jobs. It seemed normal almost for this much drama to be around. Looking back, I don't have the same opinions. No one involved ended up in rehab or prison and all live relatively normal lives now. I was the best man at a wedding a few years back. At the rehearsal dinner, his future in-laws were treating him like crap. They were bossing him around, making him do crap, and talking down to him. They didn't let him hang out with his groomsmen afterwards, while the bride went out and got drunk. They are now divorced. Edit to add a little detail. Yes, he should have stood up for himself. His ex's parents were making him do crap for the wedding the next day, and he was too nice to say no. For you youngsters out there, this is cliche, but you really do marry the family and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, a lot of the times. High school friend of mine married a 26-year-old Marine who she had been dating for a year. Any situation where a 25+ years old person is waiting on someone to turn 18 to get married is not going to end well, no. Ugh, reminds me of one of my high school friends. Her boyfriend, a teacher's brother, was in his 20s, and she was 16 or 17. He hung around us all the time, and made our friend group pretty damn uncomfortable. Our school even had to ban him from the property, because he was always hanging around. Not at the wedding, but how the couple met. My 40-year-old cousin met his 18-year-old wife when she was dating his 17-year-old nephew. They started an affair. She left the nephew and married the uncle. They got divorced 2 months later when she had an affair with a third guy. My friend did this. He married his nephew's ex-wife and I suspect they were having an affair before she divorced, and it caused the divorce. I call him Uncle Stepdad, since his great-nephews are now also his stepsons. He is 45, she is 22. They are still married and expecting their first child. During the cake ceremony, the bride rather forcefully shoved a piece of cake into the groom's face. It seemed to be done with a little too much anger and not enough good humor. You could tell the groom was not happy. They were divorced a year later. It wasn't at a wedding, but it was the first time I really sat down to talk to the couple. They came to town about a year after the wedding, and my wife, cousin to the groom, and I met them for drinks at one of the cool parts of Cool City. One of the first topics of conversation was what we knew about the lifestyle scene, a word which in this case means swinger. Afterward, I pointed out to my wife that the bride seemed to have been rather openly and boldly flirting with her. My wife shrugged it off, because I'm often pretty terrible at that kind of thing. We met one more time, this time for a funeral. After the ceremony, we were hanging out in a hotel room drinking. The bride again seemed to be pretty openly flirting with my wife, and this time was going out of her way to show off her talent for bedroom knots. Again, the groom is there in the room. I pointed out all of this again, and this time my wife tacitly agreed. The two would divorce soon after. The bride, it seems, only discovered or accepted that she was a lesbian after she'd gotten married. While they were planning the wedding, the bride came to me and asked, is it normal to realize that getting married is a huge mistake, but still go through with it? Do you think we can still be happy? I tried to talk gently to her about everything, and she admitted that her and her groom had already had sex and that, if she didn't marry him, nobody else would want used goods and she would go to hell. They got married. Worst part is, they'll probably stay married forever, because they are very religious and God doesn't allow for divorce. It was real hard to watch the bride cry as she walked down the aisle. Not happy tears either. Edited to add, just want to make it clear that I do not agree with what she felt. I tried to gently explain that her not being a virgin does not make her used goods. Her response was, well, you're a bisexual Christian, so God isn't happy with you either. But at least you married a man, so you can hide it. This poor girl was raised to believe the worst that Christianity can offer. She was 17 when she was getting married to her 18-year-old groom. It was just a devastating wedding. When she went alone on her honeymoon, because she booked a trip to the Caribbean despite her newlywed husband having a severe sun allergy. Edit, because this kinda blew up, and I saw some mean comments about her. She was a good friend, and they had been together for some years. They married young, and it didn't occur to them that it would be strange if she went on the honeymoon and he stayed behind. He was a good guy and just wanted to see her happy, and she really wanted to go on this vacation because she had never left the country. They separated half a year after the wedding, and my friend, the bride, told me that the marriage had been a way to prolong the relationship despite both of them knowing that it was already over some time before they got married. Kinda like a couple gets a baby to save marriage. It really was just sad because they were a nice couple, but they stayed friends after separating. And I can guarantee that she didn't cheated on him while away. They were both really loyal. About his sun allergy, he had red hair, a really fair skin, and burned up within minutes. And I mean really bad sunburn, the kind you have to go to the hospital for. He always had to wear sunglasses, long-armed shirts and a hat, even on cloudy days, so the vacation was not for him. It was an Appalachian wedding in West Virginia. At the reception, there was a dude in the bathroom looking super depressed. He told literally anyone who asked that he was sad because the night before the wedding, the bride told him that was the last time they would fuck. People were super drunk by then, so it was a fight. Ever see those fights on Jerry Springer where everyone's fighting and Steve can't even hope to break it up? That's what it looked like. Next morning everyone goes to breakfast together at Bob Evans, because of course they did. Bride and groom are there. After bit of awkward small talk followed by silence, someone's like, so, are you getting divorced? Or, they said they decided to stay together, since she technically didn't cheat on him. She proceeded to cheat on him in the most spectacular ways. She literally auctioned herself off in a BDSM slave auction thing a couple years later. Friend's wedding back in 2016. Somewhat nice affair for us given we were in our early 20s and all. I was a bridesmaid and really hadn't met the groom much prior. He was nice but quiet. Day before wedding, the bride, a longtime friend, asked me to help babysit one of the groomsmen because he was a nightmare. Ask me, other bridesmaid, DJ, the works, to help cut him off from alcohol before the ceremony, not to allow him to make a speech, keep him from hitting on girls, the works. He was an alcoholic douche with 6 kids and 2 DUIs, but was the absolute best friend of the groom. Day of the wedding, best douche breaks into the bar, gets hammered, has to be dragged down the aisle, gets the florist drunk, while they pretty much have sex on the dancer floor, and makes what I can only assume to be a speech during the father/daughter dance. The bride was pissed and stressed as well, trying to get things to not be a total shit show. Groom blocked us from keeping him in check, wanted us to just let it go, while he did everything the bride asked he not do. It was like a weird purposeful or intentional self-sabotage thing. Douche also broke into the groom's private stash of homemade meat he'd made special just for the wedding, stripped his clothes, and ran through the parking lot hiding in bushes at 11 p.m. Same night the couple texted me asking if I'd want to be their third in their open relationship, which I find out later was mostly the groom's idea. I also found out later they got married pretty quickly because she suddenly needed medical benefits, all the while he had been asking for an open relationship for the complete duration of them being together, but she'd only acquiesce if he would marry her as well. Divorce finalized a year and a half later. Edit to at, no, I did not join them. Don't shit where you eat. And no, stop asking if I'm X or Y person. Some of y'all have apparently lived through very similar situations apparently, but stop asking if you know me. I may have posted, but I have no intention of doxing myself or the people in this story. This would be the wedding of my own parents. They had been divorced for many years, but told us, the kids and their spouses, they were planning to get remarried, and would we like to go with them to Las Vegas to witness this event. We were all still in our 20s, so we thought hell yeah. Flash forward to 2 days into the weekend and there has been no word of a wedding. The kids all had a conversation. What should we do? Should we ask about it? One that should have been our first clue, that it wasn't a good idea for them to get married. But lack of perspective made us oblivious to the obvious. So we pressured them. Hey, you told us you were going to get remarried. When are you going to do it? Anyway, then we suddenly found ourselves in a courtroom, speaking to the judge. He was wise and asked to speak privately to my parents, and I'm sure asked them, why are you doing this? Are you sure? Well, I guess they gave him the correct answers, because he did it. Long story short, they ended up divorcing again. Not long afterwards. The couple got married 2 months out of high school, after dating for only a year. The whole wedding was the moment. I went to a wedding like that. Somehow they are still together more than a decade on. Don't know how happy they are given that I don't keep in close touch. My parents got married after knowing each other for less than a year, but they were in their mid-20s then. I still can't comprehend if that's a lucky shot or something usual, while they're being happy as ever 25 years later, but maybe that makes more sense when you're properly adult, willing to stabilize, and you feel like you've found the right one. For context, I'm 21. I was a deputy sheriff taking an in-custody defendant to his court date. Turns out it was his wedding appointment. When the judge asked if there was anyone who objected, the assistant DA in the back stood up and proceeded to blow my mind. The groom had a pending domestic violence case later that day, where the bride was also the victim. The man was well known as abusive. On the last call he has held a knife to the bride's throat before being taken into custody. They were getting married, so the bride could not be compelled to testify against the groom. The entire courtroom went dead silent until the judge spoke. Well, who am I to stand in the way of love? And with that he banged his gavel. They were married. The Adder's case fell apart. He was released that day and back in jail by the next week. I'll let you guess what he was arrested for. Edit. For those on pins and needles, good news is no, he did not kill her. Bad news. Last time I saw her she was pregnant with his kid, so she had a panic attack while getting ready that he wouldn't show up, while implying he didn't actually want to be married again, but they were too far into it for him to back out. They were both barely 21, and it was his second marriage. Did I mention they got engaged 6 weeks after they met? And they only waited that long because his divorce wasn't final. She was relieved when he did show, and only had a few shots to build up his courage to be there. That is, he was shit-faced by 11 AM. They separated a year later, but she somehow ended up pregnant around the same time. They got back together for the baby, and then divorced when the baby was 2. Within a month of separating, she and their kid was living with a new guy that she had known for 3 weeks. Eater, please don't share elsewhere etc. Has she considered therapy instead? It would be cheaper in the long run. It was mine. Ex-wife had a taste for theatrics and wanted a choreographed dance number for the first dance. Wanted the whole wedding party involved, but there was no interest. I'd never danced, not even at a club, but was willing to take lessons with her with the understanding we would do something together, so she could have her dream wedding. I sucked, but got through a few lessons of slow dancing. I can now awkwardly shuffle around, but don't expect anything crazy. The dance school wouldn't choreograph anything for us, so she promptly gave up. When it came to choosing the song, she decided she wanted I Want You to by Weezer, my favorite band, and the song had just come out recently, which has like a jamboree feel to it. It is not a slow song to slow dance to. I suggested we choose something else, but she insisted we would just slow dance to it. I made her promise she wouldn't change her mind. Sure enough, 30 seconds into the song she backs up and starts dancing a jig. I just stood there in disbelief, fuming, while she kept shouting and motioning for me to dance in front of all our guests. To boot, we had set a budget. She exceeded it. Then her parents decided to chip in $5K, and rather than use it to offset what we were over budget, she decided to spend more. In retrospect, that should have been a huge clue that she didn't respect me at all. Cheated on me and ran off with some guy like a year later. Got remarried before we were legally divorced. Her parents never did hand over the 5k because they'd put a provision on it that we had to go up north for a weekend and take some stupid Christian financial planning course their friend ran. My ex was also an atheist and didn't want to do that, but knowing Lou spent the money we didn't actually have. FFS. My own. I used to be Mormon, and to get married in a Mormon temple is a big deal because you have to be in line with everything they teach and refrain from drinking, premarital sex, smoking, etc. to get a temple recommend. After we got changed into our temple clothes, the temple workers led us to a room right next to the sealing room where we could have a moment together before the ceremony started. After the worker left the room, I turned to my fiancé and said, "We did it. We made it. We are doing this." And he just looked me dead in the eye with no emotion and said, I could still say no. With all of our family and friends in the room next to us, waiting for us to get married in a matter of minutes. People thought I was crying during the ceremony because I felt the spirit, but I was crying because I was marrying someone who, I realized, always made me question whether or not he loved me. The marriage was pretty much all like that, so after a year, and shrinking into a shell of my former self, I left. I also left the Mormon church. I'm single and happy now. Simply living with my dog, and have no plans to ever remarry. I used to work at a wedding venue, and could write a book about all the experiences I've had with this, but the first story that comes to mind would be this one. At this particular venue, there was a bridal suite and a groom's suite, where the wedding party could get ready on site, have a couple drinks, hang out, watch movies, bring game consoles into play, etc. Just for some context, we had a huge flat screen in the groom's suite with a pool table, and since the groomsmen always got ready fast and had their pictures done first, it wasn't that uncommon for people to want to do other things while they waited for the ceremony and the wedding to start. Anyway, when it came time for the other coordinator and I to line the bridal party up for the ceremony, we went to the groom's suite to make sure he was ready to go, since the ceremony was going to be starting very soon. We walked in to find him half dressed, sitting on the couch playing whatever game, didn't even bother to look up at us. Myself and the other coordinator said, "Hey groom, we already started lining everyone up. It's time to start your ceremony. We need you since it's your wedding." And he no joke sat there silent, still playing the game, before he said, "Yeah, give me a second. I really can't pause this right now." Right before his own damn wedding ceremony. The ceremony ended up starting off delayed because he didn't want to separate himself from his game. On his wedding day, if I'm not mistaken, they divorced after 4 months. I used to work for an event center that hosted a lot of weddings pre-COVID. After one ceremony I saw the groom slap the butt of one of the bridesmaids in the hallway. She laughed and with a big smile said, "Oh Jeremy, you'll never change." Edit. Thank you so much to the kind people who gave me my first Reddit awards. That was my thinking at my own wedding. I had no control over it. It was all his family. Had the reception at the local fairgrounds. Fried chicken and corn on the cob for the meal. Husband chewed me out that there would be no music and absolutely no dancing because he refused to dance. Mill & Sill ordered 6 cases of cheap champagne and got pissed when no one would drink it, including me. They literally could not give it away. The after party, as the reception was like 2 hours, for lunch, was at the Mills. The husband promised as a wedding gift that he was officially done smoking. He had his entire family form a circle around him so he could quickly try to smoke a whole pack, blocked from my view. I had a friend pick me up and I left. There are significantly more WTF moments before and after, but we lasted 2 months. I have been a wedding DJ for like 25 years and I have often thought about making a book about these stories. I'll try to tell a quick one. Where I live there is a place called the Belgian Club, and it is the lowest cost venue that is a private club and serves alcohol. In fact, I think that they probably make up their rental margins on the volume of alcohol sales. So anytime you are going to the Belgian Club, you know that booze is going to be a factor. In northern Wisconsin, where this is located, there is a tradition where groomsmen will steal the bride or sometimes bridesmaids steal the groom. From a DJ's perspective, it is a terrible tradition as it grinds the entire event down to a halt for however they are gone, which is sometimes an hour or more. So at this particular event the groom was stolen, which means they take the limo or whatever and go to another bar and do a lord only knows what. Before it happened I think the bride came to me and asked me to try and stop it, which is truly not part of my job, but I tried. It didn't work, and when they came back I realized why she had been so upset. One, if the bridesmaids had apparently cheated with the groom previously and there was an allegation that she had done something with him while he had been stolen. Anyway, they finally get back, and while I'm trying to set up the first dance she screamed and confronted him, and I think she even slapped him. Yep, in front of the entire gathered assembly and all of their friends and family. The allegedly cheater bridesmaid got into it, and I believe the bride started to pull her hair, and they had to be dragged apart and off of the dance floor. Believe it or not, they were able to attempt to compose themselves, and we still did the formal dances, including a bridal party dance, which I was on high alert for just in case it came to blows again. That might be the lowest of the lowlights of terrible weddings. Just terrible people to run off like that during the wedding reception. Given their history, whether or they actually had sex at that time almost doesn't even matter. I feel for the bride, but why would you go ahead with the wedding if things were so unstable and insecure to start with? This will be lost in the sea of comments, but a close friend of mine decided 5 years down the road to marry the girl he'd impregnated and abandoned when he was 16. In the wedding planning stages, I went from being designated best man to bridal party usher to musician. The bride-to-be basically eliminated every single one of his friends from having any part in the entourage and replaced them all with her friends. On the wedding day at church, the very moment they were pronounced man and wife, the bride turned to their 5-year-old daughter, ring bearer, who was sitting in the first row, and blew her an especially loud/emphatic kiss. I'm not doing the gesture to her daughter justice here, but it sent chills down my spine for the distinctly vengeful tone it struck. About 3 years later I bumped into my buddy/groom on the train back from work. It was a Friday night. We both had jack shit nothing to do, so we went out and got plastered. I learned after a whole bunch of drinks that it lasted maybe 3 months, and that she spent every last waking moment of those months making him as miserable as humanly possible. You ever see the Flintstones? He slurred to me in total drunkenness. You ever see the episode where Wilma throws Fred out of the house? Well, let me tell you. That shit happens, Grix or bats. That shit happens. Not a wedding moment as much as a bachelor party moment, but my ex got married to a woman 2 years ago from a super conservative religious family. We were still friends for the most part, and I was surprised he asked me to be a groomsman, but I figured, hey, always good to be able to stay friends with your exes. That feels like mature growth and closure. He got really drunk at the bachelor party, and at one point asked me if I ever had any regrets about us breaking up. And I said I had loved him, but no, we had made the right decision in the long run. And then he told me that he sometimes wishes that we were getting married the next week, and how his fiance's family will never accept him. And then after an awkward pause, he said, what if we just run away together? Laughed it off as a joke, and said we should rejoin the group. Then he said it again later, again in a joke tone. And then a third time later in the night. We had been friends for years, but only dated for like 6 months. Turns out he asked the same thing to another one of his exes who wasn't a groomsman, but was attending the wedding. The couple is still together technically but separated. Destination wedding videographer with over 200 weddings here. Where do I start? Bride openly doing copious amounts of cocaine on the reception dance floor in front of kids. Groom sneaking off to have sexy time with a fire dancer after the rehearsal dinner party. I was around all weekend and saw him openly flirting for 2 days before the wedding and them walking, slightly disheveled and all over each other on the golf course later. Groom chugging more than handle bottle of Jack Daniels and then claiming to beat up and fight off "3 muggers" later the night before the wedding, and that's why he turned off "find my friends" and didn't answer his phone all night. No cuts or bruises or anything at all in Las Vegas. Oddly, still married 10+ years later. Bridezilla all day long. Nothing was right. The food was cold. The cars were horrible. Brand new Bentleys. The band sucks. The ceremony was so boring. His suit is too nice. What? The bridal suite is too small. No joke. Watched her freak out morning of the wedding when the flowers arrived that the roses were "too white, not off-white like she paid for." screamed for a full refund from the delivery guy. Anyway, so then she takes them out in the backyard while in her wedding dress and spray paints the roses bright purple, which eventually dropped all over everyone's hands, and then she complained about it some more. Bride and groom wouldn't even look at each other. No hugs, no kisses, smiles or happy chats the whole wedding day. Bride got on an Elephant Inn and rode off after the wedding for photos directly after the wedding, leaving the groom holding all her stuff standing alone while she had a burlesque, or should I say erotic, photo shoot off or in the forest with the handsome Italian photographer for over an hour. Confirmed divorced. And finally, one couple literally sued me and every other vendor at the wedding to try and get her money back because they looked unhappy, fat and boring at 100% the shortest, tackiest, and lamest wedding I ever filmed. The ceremony spared no expense on everything and lasted a total of 5 minutes, and then there were no speeches, and they didn't want to do any separate couple beauty clips outside. They actually took me to court, and the judge basically determined that was what they look like, and there was nothing wrong with their video, which I had to show the judge. I do have more, but also so many positive couples too. I was a groomsman in a wedding in 2009. The bride was a pharmacist and she came down the aisle completely stoned on prescription painkillers. She was out of it, barely able to participate. She couldn't really get through the vows, so they kind of skipped that part and went straight to the public signing of the ceremonial marriage license. The whole ceremony didn't last 10 minutes. The whole time everyone is looking at everyone else like, are you seeing what I'm seeing? That night, instead of going out together and starting their married life, the groom called me to pick him up and take him out to a bar. After he's in the car, he says we need to go to his in-laws' house and find his wife. She's there with her parents hanging out, like she hadn't just gotten married to the dude who is standing in their living room. He picks something up, and we leave her there, and we go down to Bourbon Street and get loaded on his wedding night. Turns out he's gay. I'm not sure the marriage even made it a year. The end. Thanks for watching.